What if your presence on a flight caused the pilot to refuse to take off? The murmurs began the moment Travis Kelce stepped onto the plane. The tension was suffocating as the pilot's announcement echoed through the cabin. Travis Kelce's presence was a problem. The entire cabin held its breath. Gasps rippled through the plane. But no one could have predicted how, carrying a simple travel bag, he moved down the aisle with the easy confidence of someone used to turning heads. Passengers nudged each other, whispering, snapping quick photos, their excitement barely contained. For most, it was an ordinary flight. For those who recognized him, it felt like they'd won the lottery. Kelce gave a polite nod here, a small smile there, before settling into his seat near the front. He pulled out his headphones, clearly ready for a quiet trip, but the buzz around him didn't die down. The flight attendants continued their preparations, their movements smooth and efficient, though one could be seen sneaking a glance in his direction. The hum of boarding announcements and overhead bins closing suddenly paused. The cockpit door swung open, and the captain stepped out, his uniform crisp, but his face unusually tense. His eyes swept the cabin, not searching aimlessly, but for someone specific. They landed on Kelce. The captain's expression shifted, stoic but strained, as though he were weighing an invisible scale. He whispered something to the flight attendant nearest to him, who nodded stiffly before grabbing the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice echoed through the cabin, clear but tinged with discomfort. "There has been an unexpected issue with the flight. We ask for your patience as we resolve the matter." Confused murmurs rippled through the cabin. People exchanged puzzled looks, their eyes darting between each other and the cockpit. Was it mechanical? A delay? But the captain's gaze remained locked on Kelce, his jaw tightening as he made his way down the aisle. The flight attendant followed close behind, leaning in toward Kelce's seat. "Mr. Kelce," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the murmurs, "may we speak to you privately for a moment?" Kelce's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he remained composed, removing his headphones and standing without a word. The passengers craned their necks as he moved to the front of the plane, their curiosity palpable. The captain waited by the open cockpit door, his body language stiff, almost defensive. The whispers grew louder. "What's going on?" a man in the back asked, leaning into the aisle. "Why is the captain talking to him?" another woman added. Speculation took flight. Was it a safety concern? Something personal? Through the partially open door, Kelce could be seen speaking to the captain, his posture calm but attentive. The conversation was brief, with the captain gesturing back toward the cabin, as if trying to explain himself. Kelce nodded, his expression unreadable, before stepping back into the main cabin. As he returned to his seat, the atmosphere remained charged, uncertainty hanging thick in the air. Kelce's calm demeanor didn't reveal anything, leaving passengers and the audience wondering what exactly had just unfolded. But whatever had started was far from over. Something bigger was about to come to light. The quiet rustling of newspapers and the occasional ding of an overhead bin being closed were the only sounds in the cabin when the flight attendant approached Travis Kelce's seat. Her posture was professional, but there was an uneasiness in the way she held herself, like someone delivering bad news. Passengers leaned slightly in their seats, pretending not to eavesdrop, but straining to catch every word. "Mr. Kelce," she said softly, her voice steady but faintly apologetic, "the captain would like to speak with you at the front of the plane." Kelce glanced up, his expression calm but curious. He removed his headphones, folding them neatly, and setting them on his tray table. "Sure," he replied evenly, standing with a quiet grace that only added to the growing tension in the cabin. As he made his way to the cockpit, whispers erupted among the passengers. "What's this about?" one man asked, craning his neck to follow Kelce's movements. Another whispered, "Is something wrong with the flight?" At the front, the captain stood waiting, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face was neutral, but there was a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He extended a hand in greeting, which Kelce accepted without hesitation. "Thanks for coming up," the captain began, his tone measured but stiff. "There's something I need to address." Kelce tilted his head slightly, his expression open yet unreadable. "Of course. What's going on?" The captain shifted uncomfortably, glancing briefly at the flight attendant before continuing. "I don't think it's a good idea for you to be on this flight." The words landed like a thunderclap. Even the murmurs from the cabin seemed to fade into silence. Kelce blinked, processing the statement. "Can I ask why?" he said, hesitated, his professional demeanor beginning to crack. "It's nothing personal," he said finally, though his body language said otherwise. His gaze darted away, avoiding direct eye contact. "I just think it's better for everyone if you weren't on board today." Kelce's jaw tightened briefly, but he didn't let the tension show. Instead, he asked, "Have I done something to make you uncomfortable?" His tone was genuine, not accusatory, and it caught the captain off guard. The captain exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Look, this isn't easy for me. Let's just say I've had experiences that make this situation complicated." Behind them, passengers leaned into the growing drama. Some discreetly angled their phones, recording the interaction, while others exchanged confused glances. The buzz of curiosity was electric, and though the exact nature of the conflict wasn't clear, the tension was impossible to miss. Kelce nodded slowly, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I understand this might be uncomfortable," he said after a pause, his voice steady. "But I'd like to resolve it in a way that works for everyone. Can we talk more about what's really going on?" The captain hesitated again, his internal struggle written across his face. Passengers in the cabin could only watch, sensing that whatever was unfolding would not remain a private matter for long. The energy in the plane shifted, a storm of emotions brewing just beneath the surface. Kelce didn't push or raise his voice, but his quiet strength filled the space. The cabin felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the captain's response. Whatever came next would change the course of this flight, and leave an impression no one on board would ever forget. The cockpit door closed softly, shutting out the hum of the cabin. Travis Kelce stood near the captain, his frame relaxed but his eyes sharp, reading every flicker of emotion on the man's face. The captain's uniform was pristine, his posture rigid, but there was an undeniable tension in the air, as though he were holding back a storm of emotion. "I owe you an explanation," the captain began, his voice steady but low. His hand gripped the edge of the panel beside him, knuckles white. "This isn't about you personally, Mr. Kelce." Kelce nodded once, giving the man space to speak. The silence stretched, the weight of unspoken words growing heavier with each passing second. Finally, the captain exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly, as if surrendering to the moment. "Years ago, I lost someone very close to me," he said, his voice cracking faintly. "My younger brother. He died in a car accident." Kelce's expression softened, the calm in his demeanor encouraging the man to continue. The driver was a professional athlete, the captain said, his words halting now, as though each one physically hurt. Someone who had everything, a career, fame, money, but their recklessness, it took everything from me. His eyes flicked briefly to Kelce, then away, as though afraid of the judgment he might see. The room seemed to shrink around them. Even the faint sound of engines outside felt distant. "I know it's not fair," the captain admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Seeing you, it brought it all back. It's irrational. I know that. But in the moment, I couldn't separate you from the past." Kelce let the words settle, his silence deliberate, respectful. Finally, he spoke, his tone warm but steady. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been. I'm sorry for your loss." The captain's eyes met Kelce's for the first time, and in them was a mix of surprise and relief. It wasn't the reaction he'd expected. "It takes a lot to talk about something like that," Kelce continued. "I appreciate you sharing it with me." The tension in the cockpit shifted, no longer crackling but heavy with understanding. Outside in the cabin, passengers leaned in their seats, their curiosity palpable. Though they couldn't hear the exchange, they could feel that something profound was unfolding behind the closed door. As Kelce stood there, listening without judgment, the captain's rigid stance began to soften. The walls he'd built around his grief cracked just slightly, enough for a moment of connection to slip through. Kelce glanced back at the door to the cabin, his brow furrowed, deep in thought. The next step wasn't obvious, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the end of the story. Something more had to be done. Something that would leave an impact far beyond this plane. The silence in the cabin grew heavier as Travis Kelce returned to his seat. Whispers rippled through the passengers, their confusion and curiosity swirling like an unspoken storm. But Kelce's calm demeanor didn't falter. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped loosely, as if weighing an invisible decision. Kelce stood again, his towering presence drawing every gaze in the room. Without hesitation, he walked toward the flight attendant, his voice low, but carrying the clarity of someone resolute. "It's okay," he said, gesturing toward the cockpit. "I'll step off the flight." The collective gasp that followed was immediate. "No way!" a man in the middle row blurted, standing half out of his seat. A woman near the front turned in disbelief, shaking her head. "Why should you have to leave?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. Kelce raised a hand gently, his expression warm but firm. "We've all got places to be," he said, his voice steady. "And I don't want to hold anyone up. If stepping off the plane helps, then that's what I'll do." The passengers erupted into quiet protests, their admiration for Kelce's humility now palpable. "This isn't fair," someone muttered, while another added, "He doesn't deserve this." But Kelce only smiled, a calm reassurance in his eyes. "It's just one flight," he said simply. "There's always another plane." From the cockpit, the captain emerged, his face a mix of conflict and disbelief. He hadn't expected this. His earlier resolve, so firm just moments ago, seemed to crack under the weight of Kelce's quiet grace. Before anyone could react further, a woman seated near the window raised her hand. "I want to say something," she said, her voice steady but emotional. The cabin quieted instantly, all eyes turning to her. "My son met Travis Kelce at a charity event last year," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "He was going through chemo at the time. Kelce didn't just sign a football, He stayed and talked to him for an hour, made him feel like he mattered. My son still talks about that day." Her voice broke slightly, but she continued, "That's the kind of person he is." Another voice chimed in from the back. "My community center wouldn't have survived if it weren't for his foundation. He's been giving back for years. It's not just football for him. It's everything he does off the field." The atmosphere shifted, admiration sweeping through the cabin like a wave. The captain, now visibly moved, took a step forward. His jaw tightened as if trying to hold back emotion. And then, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, he said, "Wait." Kelce paused mid-step, turning to face him. The entire cabin held its breath, sensing that the next words would change everything. The captain's face softened, his earlier tension melting away. What he said next left everyone stunned. The captain's voice cut through the murmurs in the cabin. "Wait," he said, louder this time, his tone steady but tinged with emotion. All eyes turned toward him as he took a step forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. The weight of the moment was palpable, and the tension that had hung in the air moments ago seemed to shift into something else entirely. "You don't need to leave," the captain continued, his voice softening. His shoulders, once stiff with tension, now sagged under the weight of vulnerability. "I was wrong to let my personal feelings interfere with my duty." Kelce stopped in his tracks, turning to face him fully. His expression was calm, without a trace of bitterness or judgment. "It's okay," Kelce said, his voice low but reassuring. "We all carry things." The captain shook his head. "No," he said firmly, stepping closer. "You've shown more grace and understanding than I deserve. This isn't on you. It's on me." His eyes, lined with exhaustion and regret, met Kelce's. "I'm sorry for letting my past cloud my judgment. It won't happen again." Kelce extended his hand without hesitation. "Apology accepted," he said, his tone as warm as his grip. "And for what it's worth, I hope you find peace with it. We all have our battles. It's how we face them that matters." The two men shook hands, a quiet exchange that carried the weight of forgiveness and understanding. Around them, the cabin erupted into applause, not loud or raucous, but heartfelt, as if the passengers felt part of something bigger than themselves. As Kelce returned to his seat, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted completely. Strangers began talking to one another, sharing their own stories of struggles and resilience. A man across the aisle mentioned how Kelce's foundation had funded his niece's school sports program. Another woman quietly wiped a tear, moved by the captain's honesty and Kelce's humility. The flight continued without further interruption, but the energy on board was different now. Lighter, unified. When the plane landed, passengers lingered longer than usual, reluctant to break the spell of connection. A video captured by a passenger surfaced online. It showed Kelce's calm demeanor during the confrontation, the captain's emotional apology, and the ripple effect it had on everyone in the cabin. The video went viral, sparking conversations about grace, vulnerability, and the courage it takes to admit when you're wrong. Kelce didn't comment on the incident publicly, letting the moment speak for itself, but the story spread far and wide, touching millions. It wasn't just about a flight or a football star. It was a reminder that even in moments of conflict, kindness and understanding can bridge divides. As the plane door closed behind him that day, Kelce glanced back briefly, his expression unreadable but calm. For everyone on board, that moment wasn't just a journey. It was a lesson they'd carry with them long after the flight.